When people hear regime change, they imagine tanks, invasions, and flags lowered. But modern regime change rarely looks like that. It looks like recognition, sanctions, legal pressure, financial isolation. And in Venezuela, the United States turned these tools into a long-term policy. So how did that happen? And why would this matter to Israel? To understand Venezuela, you have to start with a brutal reality. International politics rarely runs on morality alone. It runs on leverage. And Venezuela has three things that create leverage and conflict: oil, geography, alliances. In January 2019, the United States recognized opposition leader Juan Guaidó as Venezuela's interim president. That moment mattered because it changed the objective. This was not just pressure on Maduro, it became replace Maduro. Recognition is a powerful tool because it changes who the US treats as legitimate. It influences diplomacy, assets, banking, and international coordination. After recognition, the US escalated sanctions and financial restrictions designed to isolate Venezuela's government and cut off revenue. A key milestone was Executive Order 13,884 inches August 2019, which blocked property and interests of the government of Venezuela within US jurisdiction. Sanctions are often described as non-military, but they can function like economic siege tools. They restrict access to dollars, reduce trade options, and deter companies from touching the country. The logic is simple. If you can't invade, you squeeze. If you can't squeeze forever, you try to fracture elites. If elites fracture, the regime collapses. That is the regime change theory. In 2020, the US Justice Department filed major charges against Nicolás Maduro and senior figures, framing them as narco-terrorism and drug trafficking cases. ABC News covered these developments, highlighting the international attention they received. Whether someone agrees or disagrees with the allegations, the geopolitical effect is clear. Legal pressure brands the leadership as illegitimate. It increases isolation. It raises the cost for third countries and corporations to cooperate. It turns politics into prosecution. That is a modern form of coercion. In 2020, an attempted incursion known as Operation Gideon aimed to infiltrate Venezuela and remove Maduro, involving dissidents and a private security firm. It failed, and the episode became globally known because it blurred the lines between private operations and geopolitical intent. Even when official policy stays within diplomatic language, the ecosystem around regime change creates space for irregular actors, contractors, and plausible deniability adventures. A lot of people stop at oil. Oil matters, but alliances matter more. Under Hugo Chavez, Venezuela's relationship with Israel collapsed. In 2009, Venezuela cut diplomatic ties with Israel amid the Gaza war. At the same time, Venezuela strengthened ties with Iran, including cooperation that expanded under sanctions pressure. There are documented instances of Iranian fuel shipments to Venezuela during 2020 as both countries faced US sanctions. And in late 2025, the US Treasury imposed sanctions tied to alleged Iran-Venezuela cooperation on UAV production efforts. So Venezuela was not only a domestic political problem, it became part of a broader geopolitical map. So how does this benefit Israel? This is where we have to be precise. The claim is not, Israel controls US policy. The claim is simpler, more defensible, and more important. US pressure on Venezuela can align with Israeli strategic interests because it targets one of Iran's closest partners in the Western Hemisphere. Israel's national security doctrine has long centered on limiting Iranian power, networks, and support systems. When a state like Venezuela deepens ties with Iran, it becomes a concern for both Washington and Jerusalem, especially if it creates pathways for sanctions, evasion, logistics, or illicit finance. Analysts and security-focused research discuss Hezbollah-linked criminal financing and networks in parts of Latin America, which is relevant to how states worry about permissive environments. So when the US tightens the screws on Venezuela, the strategic effect can be reducing Iran's reach and partnership options in the region, limiting platforms for sanctions evasion, weakening an anti-Israel diplomatic bloc that grew under Chavez and Maduro, reopening the possibility of future normalization with Israel if Venezuela's foreign policy shifts. And remember, Venezuela severed ties with Israel in 2009. A political transition in Caracas could theoretically reverse that, even if it takes years. That is the strategic benefit argument in its cleanest form, not conspiracy, alignment of interests. The core takeaway: regime change in the modern era is less about invasion and more about systems. Recognition, sanctions, legal tools, isolation. And Venezuela became a battleground where the US pursued leadership replacement and economic pressure. Iran pursued survival partnerships and sanctions workarounds. Israel's interests could align with US pressure because weakening Iran's partnerships is strategically valuable. People argue about Venezuela like it is only about socialism versus capitalism. But geopolitics rarely stays that simple. Venezuela became a node in a larger system: energy, sanctions, legitimacy, and Iran's global alliances. And in that system, regime change is not a single event. It is a long campaign of pressure. Regime change doesn't always look like war. In recent decades, the United States has shifted its approach to regime change, especially in countries like Venezuela. Rather than relying on overt military interventions, US policymakers have increasingly turned to subtler strategies. These methods include diplomatic recognition of opposition leaders, the imposition of sweeping economic sanctions, and the use of legal mechanisms to isolate target governments. Financial pressure has become a key tool. By targeting banking systems and restricting access to global markets, the US seeks to weaken the economic foundations of governments it opposes. This approach is often accompanied by legal warfare, with court cases and international rulings used to delegitimize and further isolate targeted regimes. Venezuela occupies a uniquely strategic position in global geopolitics, drawing the attention of major powers. The country holds some of the world's largest proven oil reserves, making it a key player in the global energy market. Venezuela's oil exports, shipped from its busy ports, are central to its economy and international leverage. The state oil company PDVSA manages vast infrastructure that underpins Venezuela's economic and political power. Oil, geography, and international alliances make Venezuela a focal point in US regime change policy. In 2019, the United States shifted its approach to regime change in Venezuela by recognizing opposition leader Juan Guaidó as the country's legitimate interim president. This diplomatic recognition was accompanied by public statements from US officials, signaling a strategic move away from overt military intervention towards subtler forms of pressure. Symbolically, the pairing of US and Venezuelan flags represented the international legitimacy the US sought to confer on Guaidó's claim. Global headlines documented the diplomatic shift as the US and its allies recognized Guaidó, intensifying pressure on Maduro's government and escalating the crisis. Sanctions have become a primary instrument in the US regime change policy, especially in Venezuela. Rather than relying solely on military action, the United States increasingly uses economic pressure to achieve its strategic objectives. These sanctions often target Venezuela's financial system, causing rapid fluctuations in currency exchange rates and undermining economic stability. Ordinary Venezuelans often bear the brunt of these measures, facing shortages of basic goods as a result of disrupted supply chains and restricted imports. Sanctions also disrupt Venezuela's international trade, with cargo ships halted at ports and foreign companies withdrawing from the market. Corporations face legal and financial penalties for violating sanctions, reinforcing the effectiveness of these economic tools in isolating the Venezuelan government. Sanctions are economic pressure systems. In recent years, the US has increasingly relied on legal warfare as part of its regime change policy in Venezuela. This approach involves high-profile indictments, with the Department of Justice playing a central role in targeting Venezuelan officials. Legal documents detail charges ranging from corruption to narco-terrorism, aiming to delegitimize the Venezuelan leadership. Media headlines amplify these legal maneuvers, publicizing indictments and bounties as part of a broader strategy to isolate and pressure the Maduro government. In May 2020, Operation Gideon marked a dramatic escalation in attempts to overthrow Venezuela's government. Under the cover of darkness, speedboats carrying armed men approached the Venezuelan coast, aiming to ignite an uprising. The incursion, led by a group of Venezuelan dissidents and former US Special Forces, was quickly intercepted. Venezuelan authorities arrested dozens, exposing the plot and sparking international headlines. The failed operation highlighted the limits of direct action and shifted US regime change policy further toward non-military tools, sanctions, legal warfare, and diplomatic isolation. Operation Gideon's failure reinforced the US preference for subtler strategies, aligning with broader geopolitical interests, especially in countering Iran's influence and supporting Israel's security objectives in the region. As Venezuela shifted from the Chavez era to Maduro, the country's alliances began to transform, moving beyond just oil interests. In 2009, Venezuela made headlines by severing diplomatic relations with Israel, signaling a major geopolitical realignment. Iranian fuel tankers began arriving in Venezuela, highlighting a new partnership that challenged US regime change policy and regional dynamics. The growing alliance between Iran and Venezuela redefined the region's geopolitical landscape, complicating US strategies. Ultimately, these shifting alliances changed everything, forcing the US to rethink its regime change policy in Venezuela. Israel's strategic interest in Venezuela is often framed analytically, focusing on how US regime change policy indirectly serves to counter Iran's influence in the region. Instead of direct control, the emphasis is on strategic alignment, using tools like sanctions and legal measures. When analyzing US regime change policy in Venezuela, it's crucial to focus on systems, not conspiracies. The tools used sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and legal pressure function as interconnected mechanisms rather than isolated acts. Sanctions are designed to isolate Venezuela economically and diplomatically, increasing leverage over its government. Diplomatic cables reveal how these strategies are coordinated at the highest levels. Rather than relying on overt military force, the US employs a system of economic and legal pressures that align with broader geopolitical interests, including countering Iran's influence and supporting Israel's security.